I never thought my own daughter would betray me, but when I walked into that medical office for what I believed was a routine health screening, I had no idea she'd paid the doctor $15,000 to declare me mentally incompetent. The paperwork was already drawn up, my assets ready to be transferred, my independence about to be stolen. But what my daughter didn't know was that the janitor mopping the floors that day wasn't just a janitor. And what happened next would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 62 years old, I thought I had finally earned the right to enjoy the life I'd built. I'd spent 3 decades as a high school mathematics teacher, shaping young minds and helping students discover that numbers could tell stories just as compelling as any novel. My husband Robert had passed away 4 years ago after a brief but brutal fight with pancreatic cancer, leaving me with a paid-off house in the suburbs, a comfortable pension, and investment accounts that Robert had carefully managed throughout our marriage. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was secure, independent, and for the first time in my life, answerable to no one but myself. Robert and I had one child, our daughter Nicole, who was now 34 years old. I'd always thought we were close, or at least as close as a mother and daughter could be when the daughter had married young and moved to the other side of the city. Nicole had married Brian 5 years ago, a real estate developer who always seemed to be on the verge of his next big deal. They lived in a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood, the kind of place with a 3-car garage and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But I'd noticed over the past year that the shine had worn off somewhat. The luxury cars were leased, not owned. The designer handbags Nicole carried had started appearing less frequently, and Brian's big deals always seemed to be just around the corner, never quite materializing. Still, I never imagined that their financial troubles would lead to what happened on that Tuesday morning in March. Nicole had called me the week before, her voice full of concern that I'd found touching at the time. How naive I was. "Mom, I've been worried about you," she'd said, and I could hear what sounded like genuine care in her tone. "You've seemed a bit forgetful lately. Last month you forgot about our lunch date, and when I came over last week, you couldn't remember where you'd put your car keys." I'd laughed it off. "Nicole, I'm 62, not 92. Everyone forgets things sometimes. I've been distracted, that's all. I've been volunteering at the community center, taking that watercolor class I told you about, and helping Mrs. Patterson next door with her garden. I'm busier now than when I was working." "I know, Mom, and that's wonderful. But it would make me feel so much better if you just got a checkup. A complete health screening just to make sure everything is okay. Please, do it for me." The way she'd phrased it, making it about her peace of mind rather than any real concern about my health, should have been my first warning sign. But she was my daughter, and despite the distance that had grown between us over the years, I still wanted to make her happy. So I agreed. She'd even arranged everything, calling me back the next day with an appointment already scheduled. "I found this wonderful clinic, Mom. They specialize in comprehensive health assessments for people our age. Well, your age. They'll do cognitive testing, physical examinations, the works. It's all covered by your insurance, and I've already put it in your calendar for next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. You didn't have to go through all that trouble," I protested, though part of me was touched by her apparent concern. "It's no trouble at all. I want to make sure you're healthy and happy. You're all I have left, Mom." Her voice had caught slightly on those last words, and I'd felt a pang of emotion. Maybe we were closer than I thought. Maybe she really did care. That Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully in comfortable slacks and a blue cardigan that Robert had always said brought out my eyes. I drove myself to the address Nicole had given me, a professional building on the east side of town that I'd never noticed before. The directory in the lobby listed various medical practices, and I found the one I was looking for on the 3rd floor, something called Westview Cognitive and Wellness Center. The waiting room was sterile and modern, all white walls and chrome fixtures, with abstract art that probably cost more than my first car. I was the only patient there, which struck me as odd for a Tuesday morning. A receptionist with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that didn't reach her eyes checked me in, barely glancing at my face as she handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out. The paperwork was extensive, far more detailed than any medical forms I'd filled out before. Questions about my daily routines, my ability to manage finances, whether I ever felt confused or disoriented, whether I had family members who could help me with decision-making. I answered honestly, though some of the questions seemed strange for a routine health screening. Yes, I managed my own finances. No, I didn't need help with daily activities. No, I wasn't confused or disoriented. I was a functioning adult who happened to forget where she put her keys occasionally, just like every other person on the planet. Mrs. Chun. A woman in a white coat emerged from the back hallway. She was probably in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that magnified her eyes slightly. I'm Dr. Ellen Pembroke. Please follow me. I gathered my purse and followed her down a corridor lined with closed doors. She led me into an examination room that was smaller than I expected, with just a desk, 2 chairs, and a computer monitor. No examination table, no medical equipment beyond a blood pressure cuff hanging on the wall. Another red flag I was too trusting to notice. Please have a seat, Dr. Pembroke said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She sat down and pulled up something on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I've reviewed the preliminary information your daughter provided, and I have to say, Mrs. Chun, there are some concerning indicators here. Concerning? I felt a flutter of worry in my chest. What kind of indicators? Feel fine. I've been feeling better than I have in years, actually. That's often the case with early-stage cognitive decline, she said, and her tone was so matter-of-fact, so clinical, that it took me a moment to process what she was actually saying. Patients frequently feel that everything is normal, even as their executive function and decision-making abilities deteriorate. It's one of the most insidious aspects of the condition. I don't have cognitive decline, I said firmly, my teaching voice coming out automatically. I'm sharp as I've ever been. I do crossword puzzles every morning. I'm learning watercolor painting. I volunteer teaching math to underprivileged kids twice a week. My mind is fine. Dr. Pembroke gave me a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. I understand this is difficult to hear, Mrs. Chun. Denial is a very common first response. But I'm going to need to run some tests. Standard cognitive assessments. They won't take long. The next hour was a surreal blur of questions and tasks that seemed designed to make me feel inadequate. She asked me to remember lists of words, then tested my recall. She showed me pictures and asked me to identify patterns. She gave me math problems that were insultingly simple, as if I hadn't spent 30 years teaching calculus to high school seniors. She asked me to draw a clock showing a specific time, and when I completed the task easily, she made a note on her form with an expression that suggested my success was somehow suspicious. Throughout the assessment, I felt increasingly uneasy. Something about the way Dr. Pembroke conducted herself felt off. She wasn't warm or reassuring like most doctors I'd encountered. She seemed to be going through motions, checking boxes on a form rather than genuinely evaluating my cognitive state. And several times I caught her glancing at her watch, as if she was on a schedule. Well, Mrs. Chun, she said finally, setting down her pen and folding her hands on the desk. I'm afraid my initial concerns have been confirmed. Based on this evaluation, combined with the behavioral indicators your daughter has documented, I'm seeing clear signs of moderate cognitive impairment. You're having difficulty with memory, with executive function, and with sound judgment. I stared at her in disbelief. That's absurd. I answered every question correctly. I completed every task you gave me. The tests aren't just about correct answers, she said smoothly. They're about response time, about the way you approach problems, about subtle indicators that someone with my training can identify. Mrs. Chun, I know this is frightening, but you need to accept that you're not capable of managing your own affairs anymore. You need help. I don't need help, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from anger or fear. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. Please sit down, Dr. Pembroke said, and there was steel in her voice now. We need to discuss next steps. Your daughter is very concerned about you, and frankly, based on what I'm seeing, I'm concerned too. You're a danger to yourself, Mrs. Chun. You could make catastrophic financial decisions. You could forget to turn off the stove and burn down your house. You could get lost driving and end up hurt or worse. I've never done any of those things, I protested, but I sat back down because my legs suddenly felt weak. This doesn't make any sense. I'm going to recommend that you grant power of attorney to your daughter, Dr. Pembroke continued, as if I hadn't spoken. She can help manage your finances, make sure your bills are paid, ensure you're taking any necessary medications. It's really for the best. In fact, I have the paperwork right here. She pulled out a folder from her desk drawer, and I saw that it was already filled with documents. Legal documents. My name was already typed in at the top of the first page. This had been prepared in advance, before I'd even walked into this office, before she'd conducted any tests at all. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The strange questions on the intake forms. The assessment that seemed designed to undermine my confidence rather than evaluate my abilities. Dr. Pembroke's clinical detachment. The paperwork prepared in advance. This wasn't a health screening. This was a setup. Did my daughter put you up to this?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I asked quietly, and I saw something flicker in Dr. Pembroke's eyes. Surprise maybe that I'd figured it out. Or perhaps just annoyance that I wasn't going along with the script. Your daughter is concerned about your well-being, she said carefully. And based on my professional evaluation, her concerns are valid. How much did she pay you? I asked, my voice stronger now despite the way my heart was pounding. How much is my daughter paying you to declare me incompetent? Mrs. Chun, I think you're experiencing some paranoia, which is another symptom of cognitive decline. No one is trying to deceive you. Everyone here wants what's best for you. I looked at this woman, this doctor who had taken some kind of oath to do no harm, and I saw the lie in her eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was willing to destroy my independence, to take away everything I'd worked for, to hand control of my life over to my daughter, all for money. I'm not signing anything, I said, standing up again. And I'm reporting you to the medical board. This is fraud, and you know it. I don't think you'll do that, Dr. Pembroke said, and her mask of professional concern finally slipped. Her expression hardened. Because if you make accusations like that, it will only prove what I've documented here. That you're paranoid, delusional, unable to think rationally. Your daughter has witnesses who will testify to your declining mental state. I have documentation from today's assessment. Who do you think people will believe? A respected physician with 20 years of experience, or an elderly woman who's clearly exhibiting signs of dementia? The word hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. She'd actually written that in her notes. I could see it on her computer screen even from across the desk. The room felt like it was tilting, and I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. Before I could respond, the door to the examination room opened. I turned, expecting to see a nurse or maybe Nicole herself, coming to complete whatever horrible plan they'd concocted. Instead, I saw a man in a maintenance uniform, the kind worn by janitors and cleaning staff. He was probably in his mid-50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and kind eyes that seemed out of place in this cold, sterile environment. "Excuse me," he said, his voice apologetic. "I was told to clean this room. Should I come back?" "Yes, come back later," Dr. Pembroke snapped, clearly annoyed by the interruption. But the janitor didn't leave. Instead, he stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. He looked at me, then at Dr. Pembroke, then back at me. Something passed across his face, an expression I couldn't quite read. "Actually," he said, and his voice was different now, carrying an authority that hadn't been there a moment before. "I think I'll stay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge. "James Chun, Office of the Inspector General. And Dr. Pembroke, you're under investigation for Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Mrs. Margaret Chun, I'm going to need you to step outside for a moment while I have a conversation with the good doctor here." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this new development. The janitor wasn't a janitor. He was an investigator. And his last name was Chun, the same as mine. The same as my late husband's. "I don't understand," I managed to say. "I'll explain everything in a few minutes, ma'am," James Chun said gently. "But right now I need you to wait in the hallway. Trust me." I looked at Dr. Pembroke and saw that all the color had drained from her face. Her hands were trembling as she reached for her phone, but James Chun was faster, plucking it from her fingers. I don't think so, he said. You've got some explaining to do, doctor. Starting with exactly how much Nicole Hayes paid you to falsify a cognitive assessment for her mother. Hayes was Nicole's married name. This man knew everything. He'd been investigating this clinic, investigating Dr. Pembroke, and somehow he'd known what was going to happen to me today. I walked out into the hallway on unsteady legs, my mind reeling. Through the closed door I could hear James Chen's voice, calm but implacable, beginning to list the charges that Dr. Pembroke was facing. I heard her voice rise in protest, then break into something that might have been sobs. I sank into a chair in the waiting room, and the receptionist with the fake smile was gone. The front desk was empty, the whole clinic silent except for the muffled conversation coming from the examination room. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, trying to understand how my daughter, my only child, the baby I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my money. When James Chun finally emerged from the examination room, Dr. Pembroke was handcuffed and being led away by two other people in professional attire who must have been waiting somewhere in the building. The doctor looked broken, her earlier confidence completely shattered. James Chun sat down in the chair next to me, and up close I could see the weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from seeing too much of humanity's worst impulses. Mrs. Chun, he said quietly, I owe you an explanation. That would be nice, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Starting with why you have the same last name as me. A sad smile crossed his face. Robert Chun was my uncle. Your husband was my uncle, which makes you my aunt, though we've never met. Robert was my father's younger brother, and our family lost touch years ago after my father passed away. But I always remembered Uncle Robert talking about his wife Margaret, the math teacher who could make calculus sound like poetry. I felt tears prick my eyes at the memory of Robert, at this unexpected connection to a past I'd thought was gone forever. I didn't know Robert had a nephew. He never mentioned you. Family rifts run deep sometimes, James said. My father and Uncle Robert had a falling out when I was young, something about money and pride, the usual stupid reasons families stopped talking to each other. By the time I was old enough to understand how foolish it all was, my father had passed, and I didn't know how to reach out. But I kept tabs on Uncle Robert from a distance, and after he died I made sure to check in on you occasionally, even though you didn't know I existed. You've been watching out for me? I asked, not sure how to feel about this revelation. In a limited way, he admitted. I work for the Inspector General's office, investigating healthcare fraud. About 6 months ago, we opened an investigation into Dr. Ellen Pembroke and her clinic. She was running a scheme where she'd declare elderly patients mentally incompetent in exchange for payment from family members who wanted to gain control of their assets. We'd been building a case, gathering evidence, but we needed to catch her in the act to make charges stick. He paused, and I saw guilt flash across his face. 3 weeks ago, I found out that your daughter Nicole had contacted Dr. Pembroke. I recognized your name immediately. I wanted to warn you to stop this before it went any further, but my supervisor insisted we needed to let it play out to have solid evidence for the prosecution. So I've been here, undercover as a janitor, waiting for your appointment. I tried to process this, tried to reconcile the caring gesture of a nephew I'd never met with the fact that he'd let me walk into this trap. You used me as bait. Yes, he said simply, not trying to sugarcoat it. And I'm sorrier about that than you can imagine. But Mrs. Chun, Aunt Margaret, we've just taken down a major fraud operation. Dr. Pembroke has been doing this for years, destroying lives, stealing people's independence and dignity. Today we recovered files on 23 other victims, and because of what happened here today, we have everything we need to put her away for a very long time. What about Nicole? I asked, and my voice cracked on my daughter's name. What happens to her? James's expression darkened. She's being arrested as we speak. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft, elder abuse. She's facing serious charges, Mrs. Chun. This wasn't just a daughter making a bad decision. She paid Dr. Pembroke $15,000 to falsify your assessment. She had paperwork drawn up to transfer your assets into her name. She had a plan to move you into a memory care facility, once she had power of attorney, even though there's nothing wrong with your memory. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. I felt something inside me shatter. Whatever remaining illusions I'd had about my daughter, about our relationship, about her love for me, crumbled into dust. Why? I whispered. Why would she do this to me? Money, James said bluntly. Her husband Brian's real estate ventures are failing. They're drowning in debt, facing foreclosure on their house. They saw your assets, your pension, your investments, and they decided they wanted it more than they wanted to preserve their relationship with you. I'm sorry, Aunt Margaret. I know this hurts. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of betrayal pressing down on both of us. Finally, I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since I'd walked out of that examination room. What happens now? To me, I mean. Where do I go from here? James reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, different from the official credentials he'd shown earlier. This one had a personal phone number handwritten on it. You go home, he said. You live your life. You do exactly what you've been doing, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with you except that you trusted the wrong person. But if you need anything, if you want to talk, if you just want to connect with the family you didn't know you had, you call me. My wife Sarah and we'd like to get to know you. Uncle Robert always said you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and I'd like to understand why he said that. I took the card, my fingers trembling slightly as I closed them around it. I'd like that too, I managed to say. There's one more thing, James said, standing up and offering me his hand to help me to my feet. We're going to need you to give a statement to testify when this goes to trial. It won't be easy, especially where Nicole is concerned, but these people need to be stopped, and you're the key to making that happen. I thought about all those other victims, the 23 people whose files James had mentioned. I thought about how many more people Dr. Pembroke might have destroyed if this had continued. And I thought about the person I'd been before I walked into this clinic, someone who'd spent her life teaching young people to think clearly, to solve problems, to stand up for what was right. I'll do it, I said firmly. I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. James smiled, and I saw Robert in that smile, a glimpse of the man I'd loved reflected in this nephew I'd never known existed. Uncle Robert always said you were the strongest person he'd ever met. I'm starting to see what he meant. As we walked out of the clinic together, past the empty reception desk and through the sterile lobby, I felt something unexpected stirring inside me. Not just anger at the betrayal, though that was certainly there. Not just hurt at my daughter's actions, though that pain was sharp and deep. But something else, something that felt almost like relief. For 4 years since Robert's death, I'd been drifting, filling my days with activities and volunteer work, and hobbies that kept me busy but never quite fulfilled. I'd been existing rather than living, going through motions without real purpose. But now, walking out into the bright March sunshine with my newfound nephew beside me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like I mattered. Like my life had meaning beyond just getting through each day. Like maybe the worst thing that had almost happened to me today was actually going to become the catalyst for something better. I didn't know then how right I was or how much my life was about to change. I only knew that I'd survived something terrible, and I'd found family in the most unexpected place, and somehow improbably I was going to be okay. We reached my car, and James insisted on following me home to make sure I got there safely. As I drove through familiar streets toward the house Robert and I had shared for 30 years, I thought about trust and betrayal, about family and blood, about the difference between the relatives you're born with and the ones you choose. Nicole had been my daughter by birth, but she'd chosen to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. James was my nephew by chance, someone I'd never met until today, but he'd chosen to protect me even though I'd been a stranger to him. Maybe family wasn't really about blood after all. Maybe it was about who showed up when it mattered, who stood by you when the world tried to tear you down, who saw you as worthy of protection and love, even when you didn't know they existed. The sun was setting by the time I pulled into my driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Robert would have called magnificent. James pulled in behind me and walked me to my door, making sure I got inside safely before saying goodbye. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. We'll start the process of getting your statement, and then maybe Sarah and I can take you to dinner. Get to know each other properly. I'd like that very much, I said, and I meant it. After he left, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Robert and I had cooked 1,000 meals together, where we'd planned our lives and dreamed our dreams. The house felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because I had changed. The woman who'd left this morning to go to what she thought was a routine health screening was not the same woman who'd come home. That woman had been naive, trusting to a fault, willing to believe the best of people even when evidence suggested otherwise. This woman, the one standing in this kitchen right now, had looked betrayal in the face and survived. Had discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Had found that even when the people who were supposed to love you tried to destroy you, there were still good people in the world who would fight for you. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel Robert's absence as an aching void. Instead, I felt his presence as a comfort, as if he were sitting across from me, proud of how I'd handled today, pleased that I'd found his nephew, happy that I was going to be okay. I met James today, I said out loud to the empty kitchen. Your nephew. He's a good man, Robert. He saved me from something terrible. I think you'd be proud of him. The house was silent, but it felt like a peaceful silence rather than a lonely one. I finished my tea and went to bed early, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. Tomorrow I would have to face the legal system, make statements, begin the process of seeing my daughter prosecuted for what she tried to do to me. Tomorrow I would have to figure out how to move forward from this betrayal, how to rebuild my life around this new reality. But tonight I just needed to rest. To let my mind and heart process everything that had happened. To accept that my life had changed in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was about that business card James had given me, sitting on my nightstand. A connection to family I'd never known. A promise of relationships yet to be built. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there could be unexpected light. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning of my story, not the end. I didn't know that the testimony I would give would lead to a national investigation into elder fraud. I didn't know that James and his wife Sarah would become the family I'd always wished Nicole could be. I didn't know that my experience would inspire me to start an advocacy organization to protect other elderly people from the kind of predators who tried to destroy me. All I knew that night was that I'd survived. That I'd been tested and hadn't broken. That somewhere out there my daughter was facing consequences for her actions and I was free. Free from her manipulation, free from the false declarations of incompetence, free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes survival is its own kind of victory. Sometimes just making it through the day with your dignity and independence intact is worth celebrating. I closed my eyes and slept dreamlessly peacefully, for the first time in longer than I could remember. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I was simply grateful to be myself in my own home, with my mind intact and my future still my own. The worst had tried to happen and I'd survived. Everything else would be easier by comparison. The morning after my daughter's attempt to have me declared incompetent, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains, and the jarring sound of my doorbell ringing insistently. For a moment I lay there disoriented, wondering if yesterday had been some kind of elaborate nightmare. Then I saw James's business card on my nightstand and reality came crashing back. The doorbell rang again, followed by urgent knocking. I grabbed my robe and hurried downstairs, my heart racing. Through the peephole I saw a woman I didn't recognize, probably in her late 40s, with auburn hair and worry lines etched around her eyes. She was holding what looked like a bakery box. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged. The woman's face flooded with relief when she saw me. Mrs. Chun? Margaret Chun. Her voice was warm but strained. I'm Sarah, James's wife. He called me last night and told me everything. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I couldn't sleep knowing what you've been through. I brought cinnamon rolls. Homemade. I stress bake. Despite everything, I found myself smiling as I unlatched the chain and opened the door properly. Sarah Chun was shorter than me by several inches, with kind hazel eyes that reminded me of my mother's. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she radiated the sort of genuine warmth that can't be faked. Come in, I said, standing aside. Though I have to warn you, I'm not at my most presentable right now. Neither am I most mornings, Sarah said, stepping inside and looking around with undisguised curiosity. Oh, Margaret, this house is lovely. James told me about Uncle Robert, about how you two built a life together here. You can feel it in the walls, you know? The love. I led her to the kitchen, touched by her words and slightly overwhelmed by her presence. I'd spent so much time alone since Robert died. And now suddenly I had a nephew and his wife appearing in my life like characters from a story I hadn't written. Sarah set the bakery box on the kitchen table and began unpacking it with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Fresh cinnamon rolls, still warm, along with real butter and a container of what looked like homemade glaze. She noticed me watching her and smiled apologetically. I know it's a lot. James always says I have a tendency to overwhelm people when I'm nervous. But I've been wanting to meet you for years, ever since James told me about Uncle Robert and the family rift. And then when he came home last night and explained what happened at that clinic, what your daughter tried to do to you, I just knew I had to come over. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay, I said honestly, settling into my usual chair at the table. I think I could use some overwhelming right now. Yesterday was rather underwhelming in terms of family support. Sarah's expression shifted to something fierce and protective. What that girl tried to do to you is unconscionable. I have 2 daughters of my own, and I cannot imagine, I just cannot fathom how someone could look at the person who gave them life and raised them and decide to steal everything from them. It makes me physically sick. She poured us both coffee from a thermos she'd apparently brought with her, then sat down across from me with a cinnamon roll on a plate. For a moment we just sat there, 2 women who'd been strangers yesterday, sharing breakfast in comfortable silence. Tell me about your daughters, I said finally, wanting to hear about family relationships that actually worked, that weren't built on lies and manipulation. Sarah's face lit up. Emma just turned 21. She's studying environmental science at the university, wants to save the world one recycling program at a time. And Lily is 18, just started her first year of college. She's pre-law, wants to follow in her father's footsteps. They're both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure, the way daughters should be. They sound remarkable, I said, feeling a pang of loss for what I'd thought I had with Nicole. They are. And they're going to love meeting you. I already texted them this morning. Told them they have a great aunt they never knew existed. Emma wants to come over this weekend if you're up for it. Fair warning, she'll probably bring her girlfriend and they'll both talk your ear off about climate change and social justice. The casual way Sarah mentioned Emma's girlfriend, with no hesitation or judgment, made something in my chest loosen. Nicole had always been so concerned with appearances, with what the neighbors thought, with maintaining a certain image. Sarah clearly cared more about substance than surface. I'd like that very much, I said. It's been a long time since this house had young people in it. Since it felt alive. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's going to feel alive again, Margaret. Promise you that. We're family and family shows up for each other. Real family. Not the kind that tries to have you declared mentally incompetent. We spent the next 2 hours talking. Sarah told me about her work as a school counselor, about the challenges of helping teenagers navigate an increasingly complicated world. I told her about my years teaching mathematics, about the students who'd made it all worthwhile. She asked about Robert, and I found myself sharing memories I hadn't spoken aloud in years. The time he tried to surprise me with breakfast in bed, and nearly set the kitchen on fire. The way he'd hold my hand during scary movies even though he was more frightened than I was. How he'd supported my decision to go back to school for my master's degree when Nicole was still in elementary school, even though it meant years of tight budgets and him doing more than his share of household work. He sounds like he was one of the good ones, Sarah said softly. He was. And I'm realizing now that Nicole never really appreciated him. She always seemed almost embarrassed by how ordinary he was, how he worked as an accountant instead of something more glamorous. She wanted us to be wealthier, more impressive. I used to think it was just teenage insecurity, but maybe it was always there. That dissatisfaction with what we had, that craving for more. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. James mentioned that Nicole's husband is in real estate development. Big houses, expensive cars, that whole scene. Brian always seemed to be chasing the next big deal, I confirmed. And Nicole loved the lifestyle, even when I suspected they couldn't really afford it. I tried to talk to her once about living within their means, about the dangers of over-leveraging, but she got defensive. Said I didn't understand how business worked in the modern world. The modern world where you steal from your own mother? Sarah's voice was sharp with disgust. That's not business, that's sociopathy. Before I could respond, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was my lawyer Patricia Hammond, someone I'd worked with years ago when Robert and I had updated our wills. I'd forgotten that Nicole was listed as my emergency contact on all my legal documents. I should probably take this, I told Sarah, who nodded and stood to give me privacy, though I gestured for her to stay. Margaret. Patricia's voice was concerned and slightly confused. I just received a very strange call from the police. They said you were involved in some kind of incident yesterday? Something about fraud in your daughter? I'm trying to piece together what happened. I spent the next 15 minutes explaining everything. The fake health screening, Dr. Pembroke's assessment, the prepared legal documents, James's intervention. Patricia listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath at several points in the story. My God, Margaret, she said when I finished. This is elder abuse. Financial exploitation. Your daughter could go to prison for this. I know, I said quietly. James told me last night that she's being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. Good. She should be. But Margaret, we need to talk about protecting you going forward. If Nicole was willing to go this far, we need to make sure all your legal documents are ironclad. I want to review your will, your power of attorney designations, everything. And I want to do it today if possible. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I glanced at Sarah, who was nodding encouragingly. Yes, I can do that. Excellent. I'm clearing my schedule. This is too important to wait. Come at 2 o'clock and plan to spend a couple hours. We're going to make sure that no one, and I mean no one, can ever try something like this again. After I hung up, Sarah insisted on driving me to the lawyer's office that afternoon. She had the day off from work and said she wasn't about to let me face this alone. On the drive downtown, she told me more about James's work with the Inspector General's office. He's been investigating healthcare fraud for almost 15 years now, she explained as we navigated through midday traffic. It started after his father, Robert's brother, died from complications of diabetes. The family couldn't afford his medications, and James watched him deteriorate over months. After the funeral, James discovered that his father's insurance company had been denying legitimate claims, pocketing money that should have gone to patient care. That's when he decided to dedicate his career to stopping people who exploit the vulnerable. So finding out that Nicole had contacted Dr. Pembroke must have been particularly difficult for him, I said, understanding now why James had seemed so personally invested yesterday. It destroyed him, Sarah admitted. He came home that night 3 weeks ago and just sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He said he'd found his aunt, Uncle Robert's widow, and he was going to have to use you as bait to catch the people trying to hurt you. He wanted to warn you to stop it before it started, but his supervisor insisted they needed solid evidence. James didn't sleep for weeks, worrying about what might go wrong. I felt a wave of gratitude for this man I barely knew. This nephew who'd cared enough to lose sleep over a stranger who happened to be family. He saved me, I said simply. If he hadn't been there, I might have signed those papers. I was so confused, so frightened by what Dr. Pembroke was saying. I might have believed her. But you didn't, Sarah pointed out. You figured out something was wrong. You confronted her. That took courage, Margaret. Patricia Hammond's office was in a converted Victorian house near the downtown courthouse, all hardwood floors and tall windows that let in pools of afternoon light. Patricia herself was a formidable woman in her early 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. She hugged me when I arrived, which surprised me since our previous interactions had been purely professional. I cannot believe what happened to you, she said, ushering me into her office. When the police called, I thought there must be some mistake. But I've pulled the complaint, and Margaret, this is serious. Very serious. Sarah had offered to wait in the reception area, but Patricia invited her to join us. Family should hear this, she said firmly. For the next 3 hours, Patricia walked me through every legal document I had. My will, which currently named Nicole as primary beneficiary and executor. My power of attorney, which I'd never actually designated to anyone after Robert died. My advance directives for healthcare decisions. Every piece of paper that could potentially be used to control my life or my assets. We're changing all of this. Patricia announced. Today. Right now. Nicole is not getting a dime of your estate, and she will never have any legal authority over your medical or financial decisions. I want you to think carefully about who you trust, who you want to have these responsibilities if you're ever unable to make decisions for yourself. I looked at Sarah, who'd been sitting quietly beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand when the conversation got particularly difficult. I thought about James, who'd risked his investigation to protect me. I thought about Emma and Lily, these nieces I hadn't met yet but who apparently wanted to know me. James, I said. I want James to have power of attorney, both medical and financial. Patricia nodded approvingly. Good choice. He's law enforcement, he's family, and based on what you've told me, he's proven his trustworthiness. What about your will? Obviously Nicole is out, but you need to designate beneficiaries. This was harder. I'd spent my entire adult life assuming Nicole would inherit everything, that she'd cherish the things Robert and I had built together, that she'd understand the value of what we were leaving her. I need time to think about that, I admitted. I'm not ready to make that decision today. That's fine, Patricia said. For now, we'll set up a trust with provisions that you can modify as you get to know your new family better. But Margaret, I want you to understand something. What Nicole did wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal. And even if she somehow avoids prison time, you need to accept that your relationship with your daughter is over. The words hit me hard, even though I'd known they were coming. Over. 34 years of being Nicole's mother. Reduced to a single word. Over. Sarah must have seen something in my face because she spoke up for the first time in an hour. Patricia, can you give us a moment? The lawyer nodded and stepped out of the office. As soon as the door closed, Sarah turned to me with tears in her eyes. It's okay to grieve, she said softly. Even when someone has hurt you badly, even when they've betrayed you in the worst possible way, you're allowed to grieve the relationship you thought you had. You're allowed to mourn the daughter you believed Nicole was, even if that person never really existed. I keep thinking about when she was little, I whispered, my own tears finally breaking free. She was such a sweet child, always drawing me pictures, always wanting to help in the garden. Where did that little girl go? When did she become someone who could look me in the eye and plot to steal my life? I don't know, Sarah said honestly. Sometimes people change. Sometimes the person we think we raised isn't the person they choose to become. But Margaret, listen to me. This is not your fault. You were a good mother. You gave her everything a child could need. What she chose to do with that, the person she decided to be, that's on her. We sat there in Patricia's office crying together, this woman who'd been a stranger yesterday and was becoming a friend today. When Patricia returned, she took one look at us and produced a box of tissues without comment. Let's finish this, she said gently. The sooner we get your legal affairs in order, the sooner you can start moving forward. By the time we left Patricia's office, it was nearly 6 in the evening. My legal documents had been completely restructured. James was now my designated power of attorney with Sarah as backup. My will had been changed to create a trust that would be managed by Patricia's firm, with distributions to be determined at a later date when I'd had time to process everything. Nicole's name had been removed from every document, erased as if she'd never existed. You need to eat something, Sarah declared as we walked to her car. Real food, not just cinnamon rolls. James is working late tonight, so you're coming home with me. I'm making lasagna, and I won't take no for an answer. The Chun house was a warm, chaotic contrast to my quiet, orderly home. Shoes piled by the front door, photos covering every available surface, a cat that immediately wound itself around my ankles purring loudly. Sarah's younger daughter Lily was home, sprawled on the couch with textbooks spread around her. Mom, I can't find my sociology notes, did you see them? Lily called out without looking up. Then she did look up, saw me standing there with her mother, and her eyes went wide. Oh my God, you're Aunt Margaret. The one Dad has been freaking out about. Hi. Wow. This is so weird. In a good way. I mean, not good that someone tried to steal your money, that's terrible, but good that you're here now and we get to meet you. Sarah laughed. Lily, take a breath. You're going to scare Margaret away. No, she's not, I said, charmed by this girl's earnest rambling. She had James's dark hair and Sarah's warm eyes, and she reminded me of my students, bright and enthusiastic and slightly chaotic. Dinner was exactly what I needed. Lily asked 1,000 questions about my teaching career, about mathematics, about what college was like in my generation. Sarah told stories about James's more ridiculous undercover assignments. The cat, whose name was apparently Chairman Meow, kept trying to steal food off my plate. It was normal and messy and perfect. Dad says you're going to testify against that doctor, Lily said over dessert, her expression turning serious. That's really brave. I don't think I could face someone who tried to hurt me like that. I don't know if it's brave, I said honestly. I just know it's necessary. Dr. Pembroke has hurt other people, and she'll keep hurting people unless someone stops her. That's literally the definition of brave, Lily insisted. Doing the right thing even when it's hard and scary. Later, as Sarah drove me home through streets lit by street lamps and the glow of house windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the vague, abstract hope that things might get better eventually, but concrete hope grounded in real connections and genuine care. Thank you, I said as we pulled into my driveway. For today. For everything. You didn't have to do any of this. Yes, we did, Sarah said firmly. Your family, Margaret. And we protect our family. I went to bed that night exhausted but not empty. The house didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. I had Sarah's number in my phone, plans to meet Emma that weekend, a lawyer who was protecting my interests, and a nephew who'd proven that good people still existed in the world. But I also knew that the hardest part was still ahead of me. The legal process was just beginning. Eventually, I'd have to face Nicole, have to testify against my own daughter in a courtroom. I'd have to stand up in front of strangers and detail how the child I'd raised had tried to destroy me. The thought terrified me. But as I drifted off to sleep, I remembered what Lily had said. Brave isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. I could be brave. I'd been brave yesterday when I'd confronted Dr. Pembroke. I'd be brave tomorrow when I gave my statement to the police. And I'd be brave in the weeks and months ahead, no matter what came next. Because the alternative was letting people like Nicole and Dr. Pembroke win, letting them get away with destroying lives and stealing futures. And I hadn't spent 30 years teaching young people to think clearly and stand up for themselves only to fail at following my own lessons when it mattered most. The next morning brought another visitor, though this one was far less welcome. I was in my garden, trying to distract myself by deadheading roses that Robert had planted years ago, when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. I recognized it immediately as Brian's car, and my stomach twisted with dread. My son-in-law emerged from the driver's seat wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. He looked haggard though, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that I'd never noticed before. "Margaret," he called out, approaching my garden gate cautiously. "Please, I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes." Every instinct told me to go inside and lock the door. But something in his expression made me hesitate. He looked broken in a way that had nothing to do with losing money or facing legal troubles. He looked like a man who'd finally realized the cost of his choices. "Say what you came to say," I told him, not moving from my position among the roses. "But stay on the other side of that gate." Brian gripped the gate with both hands, and I saw his knuckles were white with tension. "Nicole's in jail. They denied bail because the prosecutor argued she was a flight risk. She's being held in county lockup until the trial." "I know," I said quietly. James had called me that morning with an update on the case. "She's falling apart in there, Margaret. She's not built for this. She's scared and confused, and she keeps saying this is all a misunderstanding, that you'll explain to the judge that she was just trying to help you." The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, even after being caught red-handed, Nicole apparently believed she could manipulate her way out of consequences. She tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal everything Robert and I worked for. I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "That's not helping. That's exploitation. That's abuse." "I know," Brian said, and his voice cracked. "God, Margaret, I know. And it's my fault. All of it. My business ventures failed, we were drowning in debt. And instead of facing it honestly, instead of declaring bankruptcy and starting over, I convinced Nicole that we could fix everything if we just had access to your money. He wiped his hand across his face and I realized he was crying. I told her it wasn't really stealing because you were getting older, because eventually that money would be hers anyway. I convinced her that we were just accelerating the inevitable. I made it sound reasonable, even justified. And she believed me because she wanted to believe me, because she couldn't face losing the lifestyle we'd built. You destroyed my daughter, I said flatly. You took whatever was good in her and twisted it into something ugly. Yes, Brian agreed simply. I did. And I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Margaret, please, you have to understand. Nicole loves you. In her own complicated, messed up way, she really does love you. People who love you don't try to steal your independence. I shot back. People who love you don't pay doctors to declare you incompetent. Whatever Nicole feels for me, it isn't love. Something else. Something that looks like love from a distance but turns out to be hollow when you get close enough to see clearly. Brian opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. She wrote you a letter. The guards let her have paper and pen. She asked me to give this to you. I'm not asking you to forgive her or drop the charges or anything like that. I'm just asking you to read it. He held the envelope through the gate, and after a long moment I took it. The paper was smooth and expensive, probably from the stationery set I'd given Nicole last Christmas. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm going to tell you something, Brian, I said, folding the envelope without opening it. And I want you to really hear me. Nicole is an adult who made her own choices. Yes, you influenced her. Yes, you created the circumstances that led to this. But she chose to go along with your plan. She chose to contact Dr. Pembroke. She chose to pay that woman $15,000 to lie about my mental state. Those were her decisions, and she has to face the consequences. I know, he whispered. Do you? Because it sounds like you're here trying to make me feel responsible for her suffering. Like I should feel guilty for not protecting my daughter from the results of her own actions. Brian's face crumpled. I just want her to come home. I want this nightmare to be over. I want to go back to before any of this happened. You can't, I said simply. None of us can. This happened and now we all have to live with it. You mean Nicole, everyone she tried to hurt. The past is gone, Brian. And honestly, based on what you've just told me, the past was built on lies anyway. He stood there for another moment, and I could see him wrestling with whether to say more. Finally, he just nodded and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, the expensive Mercedes that he probably couldn't afford, heading back to the expensive house they were about to lose, to the expensive life that had cost them everything that actually mattered. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at Nicole's letter. Part of me wanted to throw it away unread. Another part of me, the part that had been her mother for 34 years, couldn't help but wonder what she'd written. I made myself a cup of tea and finally opened the envelope. Nicole's handwriting was the same elegant script I'd always admired, the result of the expensive calligraphy classes I'd paid for when she was in high school. Mom, the letter began, and I almost stopped reading right there. She'd lost the right to call me that. But I forced myself to continue. Mom, I don't know how to explain what happened. I don't know how to make you understand that I never wanted to hurt you. Brian and I were desperate. We'd lost everything, and I couldn't face telling you that we'd failed. I couldn't face seeing disappointment in your eyes. Dr. Pembroke told us it would be easy. She said you'd be evaluated, declared incompetent, and then I'd take over your finances to protect you. She made it sound like we were helping you, like we were making sure you'd be taken care of. I convinced myself that it was the right thing to do, that you were getting older and you'd need someone to manage your money eventually anyway. I know how it sounds now. I know it was wrong. But Mom, I was so scared. Scared of losing our house, scared of what our friends would say, scared of becoming the failure I always worried I was. And yes, scared of being poor like we were when I was growing up. I know you and Dad did your best. I know you gave me everything you could. But I hated being the kid whose clothes came from discount stores, whose birthday parties were in the backyard instead of at fancy venues, who had to work part-time jobs in high school while my friends got cars for their 16th birthdays. When I married Brian, when I finally had money and nice things and a beautiful house, I felt like I'd finally become the person I was supposed to be. And when that started slipping away, when the bills started piling up and the credit cards got maxed out, I felt like I was drowning. Like I was being pulled back to that place I'd fought so hard to escape. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. I'm just asking you to understand that I'm not a monster. I'm your daughter who made terrible choices because she was too weak and too proud and too scared to face reality. The letter continued for another page, more justifications and explanations and desperate attempts to make me see her side of things. But I stopped reading. I set the letter down on the table and stared at it, feeling something like grief wash over me. This letter should have contained an apology. A real apology without qualifications or excuses. It should have acknowledged the full scope of what she'd tried to do to me. Instead, it was full of self-pity and blame-shifting, making her the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own choices. I thought about the childhood Nicole described, the one where she'd felt poor and deprived. I thought about how hard Robert and I had worked to give her a stable home, good food, quality education, and unconditional love. We'd never been wealthy, but we'd never been poor either. We'd been solidly middle class, living within our means, teaching her through example that happiness didn't come from material possessions. Apparently those lessons hadn't taken. Or maybe Nicole had always resented them, always felt that she deserved more than her ordinary parents could provide. I realized then that I'd been wrong about something fundamental. I'd thought that the woman who tried to have me declared incompetent was someone my daughter had become, a twisted version of her true self. But what if this was who Nicole had always been? What if the sweet little girl who drew pictures and helped in the garden had just been showing me what I wanted to see, while underneath she was already calculating, already resentful, already focused on what she didn't have rather than appreciating what she did? The thought was devastating. It meant I'd never really known my daughter at all. My phone rang, and I welcomed the distraction from my spiraling thoughts. It was James, his voice warm and professional. "Aunt Margaret, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to give you an update on the case, and also to ask if you're free for lunch today. Sarah mentioned you two had a good time yesterday, and I thought maybe the three of us could meet up." "Lunch would be wonderful," I said, grateful for any excuse to leave this house and its painful revelations. "What time? Noon work for you? There's a little Italian place near the courthouse. Best lasagna in the city according to Sarah, though personally I think her homemade version is better." "Don't tell her I said that." I found myself smiling despite everything. "Your secret is safe with me." "Good. Now about the case. Dr. Pembroke is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's provided detailed records of everyone who paid her to falsify assessments over the past 6 years. 23 victims in total, like I mentioned. The DA's office is contacting all of them, and several are willing to testify. This is going to be a major case, Aunt Margaret. National media attention, federal charges, the works." "And Nicole?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. James's voice gentled. "She's not cooperating. Her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but Nicole insists she didn't do anything wrong, that she was trying to help you. The prosecutor isn't buying it. With the evidence we have, phone records showing her communications with Dr. Pembroke, bank records showing the $15,000 payment, the forged documents with your forged signature, she's looking at 5 to 10 years if this goes to trial. 5 to 10 years. My daughter in prison for half a decade or more." The mother in me wanted to weep. The woman who'd almost lost everything wanted to feel relieved. Instead, I just felt hollow. "Brian came by this morning," I told James. "He brought a letter from Nicole, full of excuses and self-pity. Did you read it?" "Part of it. Enough to know that she still doesn't understand what she did wrong. Or maybe she understands intellectually, but can't accept it emotionally." James was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've learned that some people can face their mistakes and grow from them. Others spend their whole lives running from accountability. Nicole sounds like she might be the second type." "She's my daughter," I said softly. "I gave birth to her. I raised her. How did I not see this coming?" "Because you loved her," James said simply. "And love makes us hope for the best in people, even when evidence suggests otherwise. That's not a weakness, Aunt Margaret. That's what makes you human." We said goodbye, and I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself with household chores. But my mind kept returning to Nicole's letter, to the resentment she'd apparently carried her entire life about not being wealthy enough. I thought about all the things Robert and I had sacrificed to give her opportunities, the vacations we'd skipped to pay for her college tuition, the worn furniture we'd kept for years so she could have a graduation party with her friends. Had she appreciated any of it? Or had she just been cataloging our failures to provide her with a life she thought she deserved? At 11:30, I drove downtown to meet James and Sarah at the Italian restaurant. It was a small family-owned place with red-checked tablecloths and the smell of garlic and basil filling the air. They were already seated when I arrived, James in his work clothes looking official and slightly intimidating, Sarah in casual attire looking like sunshine personified. "Aunt Margaret," James stood when he saw me, and for the first time I let him hug me. He was taller than Robert had been, but something about the way he held me reminded me so much of my late husband that I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, settling into the chair they'd saved. "I needed to be around people who actually care about me." "Always," Sarah promised. "In fact, I hope you're free this weekend because Emma is insisting on meeting you. She's already planning a whole garden tour thing because James mentioned you like gardening. Fair warning, she's incredibly enthusiastic about everything." The lunch was exactly what I needed. They didn't press me about Nicole or the case. Instead, they told me stories about their life together, about how they'd met at a community volunteer event, about Sarah's work helping troubled teenagers find their footing. They asked about my teaching career, genuinely interested in my experiences and philosophy of education. I always believed that mathematics could teach students more than just how to solve equations, I found myself saying. It taught them logical thinking, problem solving, resilience when they encountered challenges. Some of my best moments as a teacher were watching students who thought they were bad at math suddenly understand a concept and realize they'd been capable all along. "That's exactly what Sarah does with her students," James said, his voice full of pride for his wife. "She helps them see possibilities they didn't know existed." "It sounds like we're in similar lines of work," I said to Sarah. "Just different subjects." "I think we're kindred spirits," Sarah agreed. "People who believe in others even when they don't believe in themselves." After lunch, James walked me to my car while Sarah went to pick up dessert from a nearby bakery. "I want to prepare you for what's coming," he said seriously. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. You'll need to be there. You'll have to face Nicole in court." My hands trembled as I unlocked my car door. "I don't know if I can do that." "Yes, you can," James said firmly. "And I'll be right there with you. So will Sarah. You won't be alone in this, I promise you that. What if I break down? What if I can't get through my testimony? Then you break down and we give you time to recover and you continue. Aunt Margaret, what happened to you was traumatic. No one expects you to be unaffected by it. But you're stronger than you think you are. You've already proven that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel as confident as he sounded. But all I could think about was sitting in a courtroom, looking at my daughter's face, and having to describe out loud how she'd betrayed me. "I'll be there," I finally said. "I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." James squeezed my shoulder. "That's all anyone can ask." That evening, alone in my house again, I found myself going through old photo albums. Pictures of Nicole as a baby, as a toddler, as a gap-toothed 7-year-old grinning at the camera. Images of birthday parties and school plays and family vacations to modest destinations we could afford. In every picture she was smiling. In every picture she looked happy. Had it all been an act? Or had something changed along the way? Some moment when she decided that what we'd given her wasn't enough? I would probably never know the answer. And maybe the answer didn't matter anyway. Because regardless of when or why Nicole had become someone capable of betraying her own mother, the fact remained that she had done it. And I had to find a way to move forward with that reality. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just a photo of a chocolate cake with the message, "Saved you a piece. Come by tomorrow." Such a simple gesture, such ordinary kindness. But it reminded me that while I'd lost my daughter, I'd gained something else. A family who showed up, who cared, who didn't expect anything from me except my authentic self. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be enough. I put away the photo albums and went to bed, knowing that harder days were ahead, but for the first time since this nightmare began, believing that I could survive them, because I wasn't alone anymore. And sometimes that makes all the difference. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh clarity. I sat in the witness box, my hands folded to stop their trembling, and forced myself to look at Nicole. She sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without the usual careful styling. When our eyes met, she looked away first. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Chan, no relation to my new family, asked me to describe what happened at the clinic. I told the truth, every painful detail. The fake assessment, the predetermined diagnosis, the prepared legal documents. My voice cracked when I explained how Dr. Pembroke had called me delusional for questioning her motives. Nicole's lawyer tried to paint me as confused, suggesting my memory wasn't reliable. But I'd spent 30 years teaching teenagers who tried every excuse in the book. I knew how to stay calm under pressure, how to present facts clearly. When he asked if I might have misunderstood my daughter's intentions, I looked directly at Nicole. My daughter paid $15,000 to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could steal my assets. There's no misunderstanding in that. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, I felt no triumph. Just a deep, exhausting sadness for what might have been. 6 months later, I stood in the community center James and I had opened together, a place dedicated to protecting elderly people from the kind of fraud Nicole had attempted. Emma had designed the logo, Lily volunteered on weekends, and Sarah ran support groups for victims of elder abuse. James had used his connections to secure funding, and I'd contributed some of my savings, the money Nicole had wanted to steal now being used to help others. We'd called it the Second Chance Center because that's what it represented. Not a second chance for Nicole, who was serving 7 years in a state facility, but a second chance for me. For all the victims who'd been told they were incompetent, who'd had their dignity stolen, who deserved to reclaim their lives. On opening day, a woman approached me hesitantly. She was roughly my age, with worried eyes and trembling hands. "My son has been pressuring me to sign over my house," she whispered. "He says I'm too old to manage it alone, but something doesn't feel right." I took her hand and led her to our consultation room. "Let's talk about that," I said gently. "You're not alone anymore." Because that was the real victory. Not Nicole's conviction, but this. Building something good from the ashes of betrayal. Helping others avoid the trap I'd nearly fallen into. Sometimes the family you're born with breaks your heart. But the family you choose can help you heal it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.